Amazing. Well, I love that this is going to be an intimate group, which is perfect because I'd love to do intros. So yeah, would love I guess I would love to maybe start going around and just getting a sense of what brings you here and what you would love to get out of this session. This is such a big topic. We could go in so many directions. When you think like state of the internet, like the internet is information, and information is how you consume it, how you create it, how you distribute it, how you monetize it. And there's just so much fascinating, interesting stuff that I love geeking out on, um, and really my jam is like combining the philosophy and the theory with like the actual practice of building. Because one thing is to have these like concepts in your head, and another thing is to like put them into pixels, and it's just like, yeah, it's just a different way to engage with these ideas. But yeah, so let's maybe start there. Let's go around and understand who's here and what you all gonna want to get out of it. I can pick someone to start. Happy to cold call. All right, let's go with Jeremy. You want to start? And
Yeah, for sure.
then popcorn it over to somebody else.
Sure. So I am joining this because I'm on the Interintellect email list, and I will just say that the title is really cool to me. I really am a big fan of trying to figure out what the optimal internet usage is and when it becomes problematic. So my background is I'm a psychotherapist, so I see a lot of millennials and Gen Z, and there's something about the internet now and how it fragments the identity and reinforces certain elements with social media. It kind of polarizes you into a role, and that can really strain people and kind of flatten the identity. And so I already have an interest in this topic, and I saw that you are rebuilding, excuse me, you're building an app or a program and rebuilding the web. And I'm really interested in hearing more about what your thoughts, what Sublime is about. So I'm pretty new to that. I looked it up. The interface looks amazing. So I love the philosophy of this as well. Like, how is the internet impacting us as we then interact back with it? What's that feedback loop like?
Amazing. Awesome.
Thank you. So I can just go in order. So you're next, but then I can go to Tassin if he wants to go, just to my right. If I might be mispronouncing that.
Hi, everyone. So I'm joining the meeting from India, and I don't have too much time to look into the tool, but yeah, as Jeremy said, I looked the interface, and it looked nice. Like I like to keep up with a lot of articles and a lot of information on the web, and the current tools in the market, like mostly I use Notion, but it does not solve the purpose. Like I cannot keep up with the information in a very organized way. So like, hoping this tool solves the problem.
Awesome. Um, I guess if we're going in the list based on my list here, Alex, you're next.
Okay, cool. What's up, y'all? So I work at Sublime as well. I'm the head of creative, and yeah, I mean, I've always kind of geeked out about this stuff. And I the reason why I'm biased because I work here, but I find Sublime to be really interesting because it's the first. I have like ADHD. I'm very like chaotic, and I this is the first tool that feels to me like it allows for that and doesn't make me try to organize everything, because when tools do make me try, I will try, and then that will become my life. Like I'll forget why I ever even used the tool in the first place. I'll just like become obsessed with the organization. And so, yeah, I'm just curious. It's really cool and interesting to hear from other people, like what their experience is with this stuff. And yeah, talking about it is fun. My friends that aren't into this stuff, so I like I like finding people that are. Oh, so I'll pick somebody. Miguel, how about you?
Hey guys, so thank you for hosting this. I'm actually looking at talking about the divided attention. I'm looking at the demo of Sublime on by the way, your website on mobile is fantastic. I love it. I think it's I don't know, I'm trying to pinpoint the style. Anyhow, so I'm also a builder in the space. I'm working mostly on AI infrastructure, but I'm trying to explore um new ways of interacting with LLMs and to the internet. I think that LMs can be a way to, or the current AI can be a way to enhance the internet experience in many ways. And I think that we're just at the beginning of what could be done in that regard. So yeah, that's why I joined. So thank you.
Awesome, Miguel. Welcome. Marcus, you want to go next?
Sure. Hey guys, I'm calling in from Orlando. Um, yeah, and what stood out to me on this was so I also use an absolute mess of a Notion to organize all of my notes. Yeah, but that's, a lot of that's personal for projects and ideas, but on the other end of that, I always felt like Twitter was just too big and vast and like not a good way to connect on more in-depth ideas. It's short and yeah, I was looking through a little bit of the demo earlier and interested to see more about it.
Awesome. Yeah.
And yeah, I think Trey, you're next on my order.
All right. What brought me here, I actually was aware of one of your earlier projects, but I'm forgetting the name of it. Um, so I knew kind of who you are, and so when I saw you were doing something through Inner Intellect, I was definitely going to sign up for it. But as far as what others have said, just the chaotic nature of the internet these days, and I don't know when it became one day it was just like you could find things, and the next day it's just incredible. I don't know, chaotic. I'm going to keep using that word. But it changed. And my background going way back has been as a researcher, started it in politics. And so I remember being able to find things and it was just so nice and neat like 20 years ago. And then today it's just not. And then I'll find things that I'm like, how is this not on my radar? Um, I'll like somebody's Substack and like I've known this person. I have like their books back here and they've had a Substack for 5 years and I'm just finding this. It's like stuff like that. Um, so any way to improve that, I'm interested in.
Awesome.
And who hasn't gone? Um, D, are you going? I know Marshall's driving. Is anybody left?
Yeah, I don't want to pressure Marshall
Okay.
while he's driving to introduce himself. If you'd like to introduce yourself, no pressure. Otherwise we can.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. D Smith here. Um, I'll try to put my camera on. You'll have to excuse me. I'm calling you from Texas, and I'm making guacamole as we speak. But I'll stop doing that for
Delicious.
a moment. So well, come on over. I've got plenty. So a couple of things. First of all, I didn't know much about inner intellect, but I've gotten the mailings on what to read this weekend, and I like them. But I did attend about a week and a half ago the session in New York City on the future of publishing that you did, and I thought it was great. I thought it was very well done. I learned a lot. It had a lot of good opinions and a lot of good information. And so it when I saw that this was about the future of the internet, it immediately was of interest. I run a private intelligence company. And so we do research all day, every day. I've got about 20 analysts. But I also do some work in television. I did a TV series on global change a few years ago, and I appear somewhat frequently on things talking about global change. And I talk about global change to my clients also, who are mostly large investors, pension plans, people like that. So what I have observed, I've been on the internet more or less since it started, and we've gone from a time when you could literally, be on the internet inside some student's, dorm room in Beijing, to a point that actually one of my colleagues wrote a book called Splinter Net, and we're now in the Splinter Net. And so that's a huge change. And then secondarily, I'm involved in the foreign policy world, and I've done a fair bit of work on and been quite interested in radicalization, both left and right, and how the internet has been used by all sides to radicalize people sort of behind their bedroom door, and by building communities of people who they find who in the past, if they had certain kinds of thoughts, they would not be able to find anybody who shared those thoughts. But nowadays they can, and they're often not good thoughts. And so, this has been used and is being used for very socially damaging kinds of activity. So I was just interested in this subject, what happened to the internet? I'll stop there. Sorry, I went on too long.
Amazing. No, this is great. If anyone didn't go, feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. Otherwise, no pressure.
I see Marshall put in the chat. He's a Rome user, Twitter addict, interested in changing both.
Awesome. Welcome. Join the party. Yeah, so so it seems like we've got an awesome crowd here tonight of sort of the intersection of some people in here looking for kind of better tools personally to engage with the internet. And then some people more interested broadly in what happened to the internet. And the hope is that we can kind of weave the two together. I think a lot of what I heard people talk about in the intro really made me think about something that I've sort of been thinking about for the last couple of years, which is the medium is the message, right? And we'll get into kind of what that means. And I think Dee, you said so much about like radicalization, and I'm eager to share a little bit about how we kind of think about that in the context of the medium as the message, and how not just finding people with your views, but just the mediums and impact what is expressible and what kind of views are expressible and whatnot. I think Marcus, you also said something around connecting on in-depth ideas, but I think, like I said, this is such a big, vast topic that I think maybe it's helpful to kind of frame it a little bit and share some of the my context of where I come from, what I've been thinking about, and how that sort of led me to Sublime and what we're building. Yeah, so let me kind of set the context. We'll open it up for a conversation and discussion. So yeah, I think, broadly speaking, I sort of like the vibes on the web feel off, and I think all of us here kind of sense that. And I've sort of like been thinking a lot about how, the incentives and the motivations behind the tools and the products we build really end up shaping the human desires that we magnify, right? So, when we talk about like in-depth ideas, I think Marcus, you mentioned that, well, it's really hard to do that when the medium demands that you express ideas in 140 characters, or when you literally have a feed with one post on the war, another post with like your aunt's like dog dying, and then another post on your boss's engagement. Like, it just is like fundamentally impossible to engage with ideas at a deep level when that is the medium. And so there's a lot, I think, to be said about, or my lens for looking at this stuff is really kind of what incentives are magnified by the current internet, and and what are the motivations? And I want to really kind of zoom in on that. And you know, we could get into a bunch of different kind of internet stuff, but really, I think the thing that I've been most interested in is like, what are the problems with social media? And I think that I'm still kind of like, you know, like mulling over how to kind of distill this. But if I could just like ramble for a couple minutes on this. I don't know how, if any of you are familiar with Ted Gioia's work on dopamine culture, but he has an amazing Substack, and he wrote an article on the state of culture. And basically, like, you know, he said that like the biggest growing slice of our culture economy is distraction, essentially. Like, we are all just so distracted, and it is just super normal stimuli in general. And I love, there's a writer, a Substack writer, has this line that is just like ingrained in my head around how the idea of limitless consumption serves the economy quite well, but it does not serve the person well at all. And I think that like one of the big problems is that, you know, there's just so much consumption. Everyone, like people's like hobbies these days is boiled down to nothing more than some sort of consumption. And so that's a big problem. I think the other piece or angle to this is our obsession with the present. I think that, you know, people talk a lot about like narcissism and vanity metrics and that kind of stuff, which of course is an issue, but I think you know, there's a lot to be said about how a culture that is stuck in the present cannot solve important problems. If you're just focused on the news or the facts of the day, if you're not connected to history, and everything's like a recency bias, it just is, it's shocking how, if you wanted to see what your favorite kind of, I don't know, like person you follow on Twitter or whatever said 2 years ago, you know, your finger would fall off, or you'd have to go through hoops to find that. It's just the architecture of these platforms are not designed for accumulation of wisdom and recall and things of that nature. And then I think, you know, I mentioned a little bit on like motivation, and I think ultimately that stuff boils down to business models. So I think when you are monetizing a product through attention, what ends up happening is essentially these companies monetize based on CPMs. And if you kind of know this world, cost per 1,000 impressions. Well, the C is not going to go up. Like, you know, there's just ad blockers and too many things competing for attention. And then you just have to get that M number, the number of impressions, to go up. And how you do that is you effectively just make the whole thing a lot more addictive and entertaining. And I think that there's Ev Williams, the founder of Twitter. He, I think, perfectly captured what is wrong with this whole system with an analogy, which is, imagine if you are driving and you see a car crash, and you stop and you look at that car crash because, you know, they're like, the car just got totaled, and of course you're going to look. And so the algorithm interprets that as, you love car crashes, so I'm going to just show you more car crashes. And that is really our kind of like information economy in a nutshell. It's just prioritizing engagement and virality over quality and depth. And I think that another kind of part of this is, and something that I think about a lot, is there's a participation inequality on the internet where, because a lot of these platforms have become entertainment platforms, there is a huge divide between the consumers and the creators, right? If you think about what the PMs at Facebook and Twitter and Instagram wake up every day to do, they are optimizing for monetizable daily active users, the number of people consuming. They're not trying to optimize for daily active posters, which is just an entirely different metric. That would, I think, like shift some of the dynamics on the internet, and, you know, like maybe in some good ways and some bad ways. But the point being that, you know, there's just like, these platforms have no reverence for attention because their entire business model is predicated on time. And I think that, over like we sort of like, if you think about the wholesome early days of the internet, I think it is important to make a distinction between things people use and things people consume, right? Because in the past, the business model for products was you buy something, you give somebody money for that in a wholesome transaction, and you use that thing. Whereas now it's free, but there's a huge cost. You just don't see it. And that cost is your time and attention. And so I think that the business model and like building something that people consume is fundamentally different than building something people use. And so all of these kind of thoughts I've been turning over in my head for years. And the kind of insight, I think, fundamentally that I landed on was, if you look at all this information and then you kind of think about, okay, what do we do now? We can, one option is to say, okay, we're just going to go live in a cabin and become a monk and, disengage with this stuff, which is frankly like not an option. Like like I'm just like not going to disengage with the internet. We need to learn how to live and cope. And this internet experiment is pretty new. So let's make it work. And so, you can disengage with that stuff. Interestingly, there was an article in not an article, the Center for Humane Technology did a study on like the apps, the products, the technologies that make people happy. And I remember looking at it, it was maybe 3 years ago or something. And the top apps were single player apps. It was like your Apple Notes app or your meditation app. And it was just so shocking to me in that moment that, the things that make us like human and that make us like alive are our connections to other people. And yet we just haven't figured out a way to be online with other people in a way that brings us lasting joy. And so that just kind of like, like there was a light bulb in my head that went on and it sort of led me down this path that we've sort of like been on with Sublime that I'll get into, but essentially I've dreamed of combining the focus and intentionality of a tool for me where I'm not, trying to become famous or build an audience. I'm trying to learn and be curious and deepen my knowledge on something, which is what you kind of are doing when you're working with single player tools. But I wanted to combine that with the sense of aliveness and serendipity of a social space. And when I started this conversation, I said the sort of like, like humans are malleable and the human desires that we bake into the products that we build dictate what things we magnify. And it is true that we seek status and likes and recognition, but there's a lot of other things that we seek. We want to create, we want to be moved, we want to be challenged, we want to be inspired. And I felt like in a true kind of medium is the message sort of way, if we think about what TV did, suddenly like with TV, your appearance really matters. What is the medium of a book? It's the medium of a book is like, depth and engagement because it's just you sitting with a book that requires long periods of focused thought. What is the message of Twitter? It's if you don't understand something in 5 seconds, then like, there's nothing to be said. What is the message of AI, which is something I've been thinking about, and to borrow from an Ezra Klein podcast, because he sort of asked himself that question, that the message of AI is you are derivative, perhaps. You don't matter. Your work is replaceable. And so, in this sort of spirit of thinking about what is the, the medium that is missing, the medium of Sublime, and what is kind of the message, for me, so much of that and boils down to part of what Dee was saying, which is the internet polarizes us because it sort of divides the world into good and bad. And I think the truth is that most people are actually like the world is shades of gray. It's not black or white. It's a lot more nuanced. Oftentimes like I like most people actually can't have an opinion until they've sat with something long enough. But none of the mediums that we have allow us to sort of capture the complexity of how our kind of ideas evolve, right? And I think that, I don't know how, you know, the range of kind of people in this room, but I sort of fell down the rabbit hole of digital gardening and how that kind of medium was more conducive to less polished thoughts, more gardening and sort of like, you know, developing ideas over time, less kind of dividing the world into a binary good or bad, but rather kind of building a mental map of things. And so, yeah, all this to say that I got really, really excited by this idea of combining the principles of personal knowledge management, which a lot of people are doing. They're collecting ideas, they're connecting ideas, whether it's on Notion, on a Google Doc, but combining that in a multiplayer environment where you are kind of sense making, and doing all of that in an interface that is simple and tasteful and has a point of view. And that's sort of the journey we're on. I think because I want to wrap it up soon and open it up for questions. I think so much of what Sublime is predicated on is a shift from attention to intention. And another way to maybe state that is a shift from push to pull. So the internet today is a push internet. Everything sort of gets, you know, like pushed towards you. And I think so much of what I'm craving is software that demands that I make choices about what I care about. Software that pulls things to me when I sort of determine that I want them, and that I think inverts the internet's consumption model, because it's no longer you know, opening a feed of unrelated ideas, but rather, you know, building a library of the things you find interesting and then connecting with other people, you know, as a part of that kind of intention that you've already set and are kind of manifesting for yourself. So that's sort of like the stage that I wanted to set. I've sort of gone deep down the sort of consumer internet rabbit hole. I have a bunch of questions I think that I'd love to kind of chat about live, but I thought I'd kind of frame it and feel it out and see what everyone's kind of excited, where everyone's excited to take this, being mindful of time as well. And if there's no kind of, yeah,
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
So I like your list of things that the internet feeds us and makes us desire and brings to the fore. But I would add one, which is novelty, because I think that it, and of course, that's a very modern concept. You can look at the whole history of modern art. It's a you know, an exploration of novelty, and it's connected to all the things you said, but I think it's something distinct. People very quickly and sadly tire of things. They don't want to read a long book. They don't want to. It amazes me that anybody needs an app to meditate. I mean, I've meditated my whole life, and I certainly don't need an app for it. But the commercialization of everything is another thing that you did touch on. But I do think that novelty is. We've become so accustomed to being force-fed novelty, and at the real risk of not thinking about anything deeply, which you said. But I would just pull out novelty.
I love that you bring this up, Dee, because it is true that whatever new thing that we build, we have to come to terms with the fact that we are competing with novelty every 3 seconds. And, you know, it is hard to convince somebody to read, you know, to open their long form, read later queue when they could just scroll on TikTok. Even though, you know, I think that it's like that we know that we don't like what these things do to us. It is part of our human nature. And so, yeah, I think that you know, as you shed light on novelty, part of where my mind goes is long form versus short form, because it's novelty, but it's also novelty that can be understood pretty instantly. And so, yeah, I'm curious, like, you know, people say that they want more depth. But it is true that we are, that we are compete, or I guess there is a divergence between people's stated preferences and their actual preferences at times. And so I'm curious, like, where people stand, like both personally or any views on kind of long form, short form, and especially as it relates to novelty.
I've been on Twitter for a while and I made a lot of friends on Twitter. And there's an interesting like oversaturation I've had with novelty. I'm finally sick of it. Or I'm finally sick of all of I like know these people and it feels friendly, but I'm just getting shotgunned with like ideas every day. And I just somatically have hit a wall with it. And I can't explain what specifically that was. I just am no longer interested. I don't have the appetite to scroll through so many disjointed thoughts. And I find myself longing for more long form, longing for things to have a place in my mind. Where before I absolutely crave that. I'm just finally like hit the wall with it. So yeah, that's what I have to add to that. I do think I seek out novelty in certain things, but I'm actually like, maybe it's maturing, maybe it's just time on the internet, maybe I don't know. But I'm glad to feel it because I feel like I am an audience that's seeking something deeper for how I put my thoughts together. I use Notion. I've tried using Obsidian. I've tried using Rome. Like I've tried to do these things and I seek out that experience of having things feel put together. I did this thing where I was like, maybe if I make a list of like my 10 favorite people I actually want to keep up with on Twitter, and instead of like waiting for their stuff to come on the timeline, I just actively go to their page. So I have at least like a container of one person's full thoughts, like, and I'm like can meditate in their thing. Yeah, I don't really know where I'm going with that. Just that's what came up for me as I'm thinking about like people's need for novelty.
Yeah, I feel like I could have said what you just said because I feel the exact same way. And there's nothing better for me than the experience of like, oh, I want to know what this person's thinking and going to their like profile or whatever versus, being fed. And that's where I like my most fulfilling kind of Twitter experience is me pulling it towards me versus like whatever the algorithm's pushing towards me.
Love that. I would just add, I mean, I agree. I feel exactly the same as you guys and what you said, Katrina. Like, I find my appetite for this stuff going way down, and also, and like obviously, I intellectually I know that this stuff is bad. Twitter, I use Substack notes a lot. Like, it's all, I get it, I know, and yet I will often like my monkey mind or whatever will often find me like doing the scrolling anyways. And I think I don't know, I guess there's a little bit of like there's some frustration for me around that of like, am I ever going to be able to like not do this? And I find that it happens when I'm tired and overworked or whatever. It's like I'll find myself there and I don't really know how I got there, but I'll just be scrolling. And I know change is hard and takes time, and this is all part of the process, but it's just like the power that stuff has is really strong, like super strong.
I wanted to add to what Alex said because it reminded me of something, is that as I start to observe how I feel when I'm endlessly scrolling, it is always connected to exactly as you said, when I'm most tired, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I don't want to feel what's in my body. I use the words like, oh, my mind feels sticky right now. And I just use that as my like noting of I'm glued to the dopamine internet. And it's I think like using apps like Sublime or something that's using the internet more intentionally is kind of pairs well with having like a meditative practice in life, or understand like checking into your body to like just observe when I'm getting more sucked in and realizing there's real patterns. It's not completely out of my control.
Totally. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything, but as I heard Katrina and Alex speak, one of the questions that I've been thinking about is whether what comes next for the internet is a replacement internet or a counterculture internet. And what I mean by that is, is the goal a new internet, or is it like a series of internets that live alongside this internet? And one analogy that I found really helpful is agriculture, right? So, you know, we went from like farming to the industrialization of agriculture, and that was like really good in many ways. Like a lot of people were fed far more efficiently. But it also meant that, you know, we were producing food with little regard for our environment or animals. It led to a lot of obesity. And then, you know, what happened is we saw the emergence of all of these alternatives, organic foods and artisanal foods and all of this other stuff. And it doesn't mean that the main stuff went away. It just means there's more options. And I sort of wonder if we are at that phase of the internet where it's like the industrialization, and you've got the Amazons and the Ubers and the Facebooks of the world. And now we're going to see like, what is the kind of like the coffee shop, like, you know, maybe Inner Intellect is a part of that. And instead of like seeking to replace something like Twitter, whether that is even the right framing, whether it, you know, it's better to think about it as a counterculture than a replacement. And I'm curious how people kind of relate to that idea.
Well, I'll jump in again. And I think the thing that worries me about it is that the payment model for the internet is so based on the advertising model and the consuming model, as you pointed, and consumption is a huge issue. And obviously, we cannot continue consuming as we have, but that's another discussion. But I'm not sure how you have the. I wish I knew. Maybe you know, but how do you have the internet in the form that we would find acceptable without that payment model, that commercial consumption payment model, or some payment model?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting question, because from a business model perspective, yeah, I think, you know, the reality is that the fact that the internet ended up being ad-based was sort of an accident, right? Like, you know, these companies raised some venture funding and they said, oh, let's just get to 1 million users and then figure out how we're going to monetize. And then, ooh, we have all these people, we're not going to charge them, so let's turn on ads. And nobody kind of knew what that was going to lead to. But now we're seeing things like Substack, which is an entirely different business model, subscription based. And, you know, and some people, you know, I don't think there is a silver bullet when it comes to business model, in the sense that, you know, some people say that subscription media, it actually like pulls you further into your filter bubble. Like if you pay for, you know, if the New York Times subscriber base is largely, you know, this kind of profile of a person, you know, coastal elites, liberal, et cetera, then they are going to produce content for that kind of audience. And so it leads to, I think, different kinds of challenges, but also more diversity. I think there's also a question of scale. And I know, Dee, you participated in the Future of Publishing event, but one really kind of interesting challenge with publishing is that, you know, the marginal cost of sharing something that you wrote with somebody else is zero. It costs absolutely nothing for a writer to share, something they wrote with, 10 people than it does with 1 million people. And so, subscriptions is really interesting. I'm curious what Alex has to say, because I know Alex has a new Substack newsletter, and he has a kind of growing paying subscriber base. But it is kind of interesting in that constraints are helpful, but the internet, by definition, is boundless. There are no constraints. There's no barriers to how many people can see something, unless we kind of artificially create these constraints, which is a really interesting question around, should we, and why should we, and why should we not? There are arguments on both sides for, making ideas, if there's nothing more positive sum than sharing an idea. If I have an idea and you have an idea and we share each other's ideas, and the world just has more ideas. So yeah, I find the business model question to be really interesting. I think, just to kind of add to that, we've thought about this question long and hard for Sublime, and we really care about building a a business company that is aligned fundamentally with its customers. So we wanted to simplify the relationship to something very simple. You know, you pay us, we provide you with a product that you love and trust. But also that felt kind of a little bit more democratic in its own right. So we are experimenting with choose what feels right business model, which has been really interesting. And if people are interested, I'm happy to share some of the kind of early results there. But there's no silver bullet, you know, like the reality is that within this kind of path and world, Sublime is going to be a product that will, you know, like we are limiting the scale of it, and we are doing that on purpose. We want to, but the fact that you can communicate with absolutely, you know, anyone, like the 11-year-old me growing up in Bogota, Colombia, could only dream of, you know, DMing somebody on Twitter and landing an internship. Like there are just like, you know, really kind of, I guess, positive and negative things on all sides. And we have to be able to kind of hold a lot of these things to be true at once if we are to kind of design alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, I can quickly share just like the experience of being a creator, you know, trying to make money. So I have a Substack that I, you know, like I would say is doing fairly well. You know, people think it's a like people know, some people seem to know about it. And I make I mean, I can just tell you guys, I make like $16,000 a year from it, which is a lot. Like that's a lot. And also that's like nothing, you know, like you can't live on that amount or anything even close. So it's like that's where the rub comes in for me. And I ran into a friend who's a writer on Substack too, and she was sharing the same exact thing. And she was just like, I hope it works out for us. Like I hope I'm building an audience for something. And I think we all say that. I think we all say that to ourselves and to each other. But I don't know if that's ever going to come. And I think that's what's scary about this stuff. Both, you know, like the advertising model, at least it seemed to, what it did, I think, was like it worked, and it also trained everybody not to pay for stuff. You know, like there's so many people who are like, your newsletter is like the most important thing in my life. And I'm like, well, why don't you pay for it? I don't say that, but like it is, you know, it's like I think we have just been trained to expect amazing stuff for free. And I don't know how to get around that. I think that's a really hard challenge.
I think
Such
what, oh, go ahead.
No, please go.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what you're saying that's really interesting is a kind of alternative paradigm that obviously hasn't totally unseated that model of free and then you get everything, is like when people want to pay for you as a three-dimensional person, right? Like I have a friend who does a psychiatric Substack, and he's a psychiatrist who is extremely witty and humorous, but also throws out research points and data in a way mixed with humor that only he can do in that way. So he has a paid Substack, and that one of the perks is, well, you get to read this stuff in a way. Yeah, you could look at the dry literature database findings and you could do a lit review, but you're not going to have the exact breakdown that he does. Like your Substack is going to say things in a way that only you can do. And so it's almost like we're seeing a reverse incentivizing of people's personalities and identities. And like if you care about that person and you like what they are saying, the whole person, and you want to look at that versus a few points, like if they have an area of specialty, sure, you're going to follow that because of that area, but it's also what they're contributing and their personhood that you're paying for. Like you go to a doctor or therapist because you like that person.
Oh, I love that you said this just now, because I mean, I think that is what, especially now with all of this AI content that's going to flood the zone with so much garbage.
Yes.
I think people talk a lot about how, you know, like the robots are being trained to sound human, but we don't talk enough about how humans for decades were trained to be robotic. SEO optimized content, and and like everything was just so perfectly manicured to fit a system, and we know how to talk to the algorithm and optimize for Twitter. And I think maybe the kind of the silver lining in all of this is that in a world where like so much of that stuff is commoditized, where like you can churn out 100 content marketing blog posts at like zero cost with AI, then we are going to value what is scarce. And what is scarce is the weird, the interesting, the personality, the taste, the craft, the meaning, the story, the judgment, the point of view, all of these things that are just so fundamentally human. And yeah, I think for so long, the media ecosystem that we created was all about traffic because it was monetized through ads. But now, let that kind of world sort itself out. But we're going to have these people like Alex with a personality. And the dream, of course, is that people will tire so much of what the generic kind of AI garbage that they will, or I want to believe that this is true.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what you're talking about is authenticity. I think that's the general term that would include all of those things that you're mentioning. And it's the human element. It's that it's not a machine, and that it's authentic. It's authentic to someone's experience, it's their point of view, and so forth. And I think that the challenge is how to get that across to people in a way that will make them pay for it. And that everybody has a limited wallet, however big or little it is, and more than that, everybody has limited time. And you can earn more money, but you can't earn more time.
Yeah, it's a big question. I also think there's also this question of who knows where the dust will settle in terms of monetization for a lot of these kind of new AI chatbots. But you can imagine there's going to be some sort of ad war similar to the kind of early days of Google. And then, if a lot of stuff is paywalled, there's, I think, a question around, do we want to live in a world where the truth is paywalled, but the lies are free?
Mm.
Well, some publications like the Guardian are probably fall on the side of the you can, what is truth, but you can argue about the valid information is not paywall. But those are huge competitors to those who want to compete for people's attention, let alone money.
Yeah. One of the big sort of unsolved problems seems to be distribution, in the sense that Google seemed to like is, like the 10 blue links thing seems to be kind of en route to extinction. You see like Twitter and Instagram and whatever penalizing outbound links. And so, yeah, I guess like if for somebody that is trying to build an audience, a media company, there's just such a fundamental question around how do you find distribution on the internet today? And I just don't know that we have any sort of, convincing answers to that question.
Does feel like we're headed in the right direction, maybe. I don't know, like directionally I feel a little more hopeful than I did a few years ago. Like when Google started to really suck, as you were saying, Trey, and like there was kind of this, I don't know, and it was around COVID too. There was this gap, this like kind of emptiness that at least in my world seems to be filling up with, I mean, mostly Substacks, but like, I don't know. It feels like we're going maybe somewhere better.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious what people's experience is with Substack, and yeah.
I was gonna say it feels like we're finally identifying the problem and it's becoming relatively well known.
Yeah.
So you can't fix something until you know the problem. But you were just asking about Substack. Okay, I love and hate Substack because I mean it's it's just I create an email just for Substack and it's just always full. I mean it's just
Mm.
constantly full and like I send it to Good Notes to get away like the stuff I really want to read, but I mean it's hard and it's also I made the newspaper analogy earlier in chat. And that's kind of what Substack is in a way, especially for me. I follow a lot of current events and politics. It's my background. And so, but at the same time, it's like there's no schedule with it. And I think that's good. I don't necessarily think there should be a schedule. But then the flip side of that is how do I judge what to read and what not to? What is the author, the Substack person just putting out because they feel like they need to send something every day or twice a day or whatever it is versus what's the really good stuff. And it's like, I mean, I've yet to figure out how to manage Substack. And then my goodness, the clicks to actually unsubscribe from the free emails. I mean, it's like I have to get really mad to like go through with that, which so it's like it's never, anyway, I hope that made sense.
I
You
don't know if
can't.
anyone follows Oliver Berkman, but in some ways, Trey, I think what you're describing feels like I don't think that we'll ever get to a point where we're gonna feel like we're on top of all of the information there is to consume. But I like the framing, Oliver Berkman's framing of like treating your kind of to read pile like a river instead of a like a stream that flows past you instead of a bucket that demands that you empty it. And I think it's very freeing to kind of think about like just finding ways to like live in healthy ways with abundance, right? For so many years, humans lived in conditions of scarcity. And now like abundance, like literally, metaphorically, physically is like a bigger problem. And I think so much of it is just like a cycle. Like I think it's very easy to assume, oh, there's a tool that's finally gonna get me to get control over this. And I've seen so many tools promise to send you now an AI-based summary of all the things in your inbox so you don't have to read them. And they just suck, to be honest. Like they're just not a replacement for the joy of reading the right thing. And so I don't know. I have found as somebody, that spends like at least 6 hours a day staring at Figma screens and prototypes of in this world, that it's just more of a kind of mindset shift from, I don't need to empty this bucket. This is just a stream and I'm going to pluck this thing here and there. And that's just been helpful for me.
Okay, a counterpoint to that is on Substack when you're paying for a lot of them is then I feel like I was like, if I'm not reading them, why am I paying for them? But then it's like, how do you judge that?
Totally. And I actually find that I would love to like support more writers, but I could barely get through reading their free stuff, let alone their paid stuff. So I think I think you were the one that said like, time is like is the scarce, the ultimate like scarce element here. And there's just no matter how much technology there is, there's just not going to be more time.
I feel like it's those two things, like the fear of us not having enough time, plus the like overwhelming abundance of stuff that kind of creates the perfect environment for like a lot of these apps, Notion, Obsidian, Rome, to like the pull is so strong because the promise is you're finally going to get control of all this. Things are finally going to be okay. And I mean, I feel it every time I see a new one. I'm like, this one's gonna be good. But like, I don't know, for me, like surrendering to the chaos more and more feels like the only thing. I mean, both in terms of this stuff and life generally. It's just like letting go, like letting go of the control I'm trying to have on time, information, whatever.
I love that, and I just feel that's just I I wanted to like make my own tool before, and I'm not a software developer in any way, but I was like, if I was going to do this, I feel like having that component of it, that's just like the tool, but also like the philosophy of the tool, and someone who has a really clear mind about how to set the stage for someone to use the tool. I think, sorry, you're like mentioning that and the intentionality piece, especially with Sublime. Um, like I was just thinking about this morning because I'm the person who like I can't stop time blocking like on my calendar. My boyfriend looked at my calendar, he's like, "What the fuck is this?" And I'm like on a sabbatical. I'm just like scheduling deep work time for like personal projects. And I realized like I've been doing this for years, but the relationship I had with how I was using the tool when I was young is I would use it like I would cut myself with like the knife of my calendar, you know, like I'd be like, I'm not doing it, and then I'd feel hurt. But like I was trying to explain to him now, like it looks physically, it visibly looks exactly the same as I did before, but I'm so much softer with myself, with how I use it. I just move the thing 30 minutes later, or I just delete the thing, or I just like that internal, almost like spiritual orientation you have toward the tool is so important. And that's like a thing completely outside of the tool itself, or completely outside of whatever technology we're going to be around. And I don't know, yeah, I don't know. It's not like some church of technology that we all go to help like baptize us as like better. I just muted myself. I'm done. Yeah.
But I love that you mentioned that, because I do think that as somebody who for years was trying every productivity tool, it sort of felt like my entire personality was changing every time I tried a new tool. And yeah, I think, you know, as we built Sublime, I think we really hold three principles very closely. Like for us, marrying the practical, the profound, and the soft, right? So when we think about soft, it's what effect do you want to have on people? It's really, this is all very rooted in feeling, right? It's like some apps, you know, like make you feel insufficient. Some make you feel like awe. Some make you, and really kind of making people feel calm and human and intellectually and creatively nourished is the kind of feeling and the softness with which we approach this. The practical always, like there is a functional need around saving the things that you want to remember and use later in your life and work. And then I think that the profound, which is, you know, there are I think you know, as we build this, I think it's very important to us to always understand like what ideas about culture are we responding to, you know? If we believe in intention over attention, if we believe in surrendering to your nature, if we believe in creativity over productivity, it's really about marbling the software with these values, and not just the software and the tool itself, but really how we talk about it. Because you know, Trey, what you were mentioning, like yes, there is a tool question, but it's also a mindset question. And how can we kind of create these cultural shifts through conversation, through narrative, not just through software? Because I think it's very easy for people in technology to assume that everything is a technology problem when a lot of things are actually cultural problems.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I completely agree 250% that this idea that everything's a technology problem, it's a cop out, really, because it's, well, the computer AI will do it. That, you know, we don't have to deal with our own needs and our own predilections and our own weaknesses. And I think it's the real sources of problems in our culture.
100%. And especially now with all of these AI things that promise like never think again. Like, you know, it's like, I think it's about interrogating, like, why are we here in this world? You know, if it's, you know, the moment that it gets to that point, or, you know, what is, you can't divorce like writing, for example, from the process of thinking and engaging meaningfully with the world. So the moment that a tool promises to write everything for you, you know, sure, help me with the writing, but I don't want to dissociate from the world and my relationship to it. So there's all sorts, I think of like thorny questions around that. I also realize we are we're over time. I can stick around for a couple more minutes, but I also want to be mindful of people that feel like they need to step out.
Well, I'll just say real quick, this has been utterly fascinating, and I'm still hoping for someone's gonna just the next person that talks gonna have the solution. It's gonna answer all my questions and problems. So no pressure for the next person.
Sublime. It's sublime.
Yeah, so let's hear the Sublime pitch.
So I'm curious, is anyone in this call on Sublime yet or not yet? Okay, the first thing I'm gonna do is get everyone access. So I'm gonna drop a link in the chat with access. But fundamentally, like I said, Sublime, like the very kind of simple thing that is not kind of like profound and related to all these lofty ideals is Sublime is a simple tool to save anything that you want to remember. You know, because it is multiplayer, it has a multiplayer foundation, there's all sorts of really cool things that happen. So for example, as you're constructing your library of ideas and insights and highlights, and we have all of the things that you might expect from a tool like this, a browser extension, an iOS app. And, I encourage you to play with it because you have to feel it to really understand it. But I think what people are drawn to is this feeling of having sort of like the aliveness of a coffee shop inside of a place that feels your own. And the way that manifests is, you read something on the internet, found an insight, you can see how that insight relates to what other people have added to their libraries. And you can kind of like rabbit hole your way into other people's thoughts and ideas. But the metaphor being not let me blast my thoughts to an audience on Twitter, but rather let me kind of construct a library of ideas and insights that I want to remember. So that's sort of the gist of it. I think it's the first sort of PKM tool, personal knowledge management tool of sorts, that has a multiplayer foundation and is really being built with simplicity at its core. Like when I think of Rome, and I know of, like, for anyone that kind of swallowed the Rome pill back in the day, there's this idea that it was going to replace Google. And the reality is that like normal people just don't want to use a tool that looks like that works like that, double bracketing the internet. It's just, so we constantly try to kind of approach product development with a self-awareness of, how do we kind of reduce the kind of learning curve. And it's sort of the opposite of Notion in the sense that Notion is designed for people who want to build their own tools and their own templates. And Sublime's the opposite. It's like we are sweating the details day in and day out so that you don't have to think about how to, but again, it is purpose built to construct a living library of things you find interesting. But we are sweating all of the details around that. So you don't have to the customization and whatnot. But so that's sort of the gist of it. We're having a lot of fun. We're hitting an inflection point as far as kind of growth and momentum. Yeah, Alex, I feel like you're looking at me like, you forgot to say some key stuff.
One tiny thing that I feel like is it around all this stuff that we've been talking about is that like it doesn't feel like a social network in that there's no likes, there's no comments, there's no way to gain clout, which I found genuinely very disorienting when I first started using it. I was like I found my brain trying to find like who was popular and how do I, like just doing all of this kind of high school stuff, high school math. But it just doesn't exist. So it really like you're in a much calmer, like spiritual place when you use it, honestly, because you're not in that environment where you feel like whatever you do is going to be judged and seen and I don't know. That feels, that's the only thing I'd add is like how different that feels. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think on to the point of social networks, like sometimes like I'll talk to people and they'll be like, I still haven't found a way when I'm in line, you know, at the grocery store to like default to opening Sublime. And I'm like, that's okay. That's not what we're building for. In fact, like and then some other people have said like Sublime, like oftentimes, like if I'm scrolling through Twitter, I'm feeling anxious, but on Sublime, I'm feeling encouraged to kind of take on that project I'd abandoned for years. So I would say there's a lot more to say. I mean, this session was not really kind of Sublime focused, but if anyone wants kind of more context on that, I'm happy to share. Careful what you wish for, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. But the point being that the social, the connection, et cetera, happens when there is an intention, or happens best because there is no for you algorithm. But if you have something that you are exploring, some theme, some topic, you'll find that Sublime finds a way to kind of pull other people's ideas, related ideas in the moment to you in a way that I just haven't found anything else on the internet do in that way.
I already clicked on it, and
I'll make one more comment, and that is it. Sorry, go ahead.
Really quick, I already clicked it. I already made an account. I already scrolling through a friend of mine's in here. It feels very seamless. Like feels intuitive, and it reminded me of when I would post my notes that I would take from a book on Notion and like publish that on my website and wait for someone to like hopefully see my notes and comment on it, and no one would because it was this like corner of the internet that no one would find. And it's really exciting. I feel like I can start to live that dream with what I see so far.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I do think a lot of the people that are drawn to Sublime today had some sort of corner on the internet, whether it was a Notion or, some people had a Google Docs or whatever, that they wanted to share the stuff they were curating and collecting. One of the things that feels like best is that there are no likes or comments, but when somebody sees something in your library that they love, they can add it to their library and connect it to some other thing that they're thinking of. And it feels like a very wholesome exchange because it's not I'm dunking on you or a passive like, but it's like, wow, something here I liked enough that I'm going to kind of add it to my stream of things I'm thinking about, which just feels like a different exchange.
I was going to add one comment. Somebody asked earlier about, I hope the next person has all the answers. And as someone well over the half-century mark, I don't think there are any answers. I think you're just, we're just kind of exploring the phase space of all this, and good, great for you for coming up with something new, and I'll take a look at it.
Thank you. Yeah, we're just living the questions. That's what this is about. Amazing. Well, I've really enjoyed this, and I hope other people. It's no small feat to take an hour of your time on a Thursday. So I hope it was enjoyable and you got something from it.